So I think we'll move to our first square table session, which is content in today's context. And on this panel, we'll have with us William Pfeiffer, Ms. Mitra Kalita, Mr. Rupak Saluja, and Ms. Deena Madani. I request all of you to please come.
And once again, as I mentioned, this is on conference, so this friends will initiate some thought, but I think idea is to make it more engaging, so feel free to challenge, feel free to comment, feel free to come up with questions or whatever, and that would be good. Hello, how are you? Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, yes. Yeah.
I think a lot of people have gone
for a small break, looks like.
Small break, indescribable break.
Yeah.
But we should start anyway, and the...
You want to give a couple of minutes?
Yeah, James is going to join us, and he's got called away, and he's going to come and join us.
So are you okay for a couple of minutes? Be tolerant with the people who are going to...
Yeah, sure.
You know?
Absolutely.
Because...
maybe we ought to turn the air conditioning down. And, well, we should keep talking, because...
Yeah.
And they'll join us, because we have a lot to cover. I think the fundamental of this is content. I have a question, then I'm going to let William and all of you take over, is how do you describe content in the new world? What is the nature of content? I knew what content is once. I knew radio was content, I knew print was content, I knew movies were content, I knew TV was content. There was an organized idea behind content. And in that organized idea behind content, it was the people who described and prescribed content were the gatekeepers. So the gatekeeper said, all right, this is music. Yeah, you got it. Come through us, we'll open the gates, you got it. Films, television, everything. Content existed because somebody confined it and defined it. Now, with social media and all the new technology, definitions are leaving us, right? So there's no more confining of the idea of content. So anything is content now. I tweet a lot, and then people say, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm creating content. It's 140-letter content. So what's the limit? What is content? And then we might discover later on where is, because everybody will say, well, how do you monetize it? And I'm sure that will come up. Rupak is very good at that.
I think that content is something that occupies your mind and your thoughts. And, you know, it, as you say, means many things. It's, of course, traditional linear content where there are stories, 3-act structure. Of course, music is content and games are content. Anything out there that occupies your mind is not just the traditional audio-visual content that we think of in terms of film and television programming. And where it all goes from here, I think Deepak touched on some of the new technologies. I mean, certainly there is virtual reality where we will be immersing ourselves totally into 360-degree worlds through eye sets and headphones that wherever you look, you're inside the story and you're actually able to act out the story. I mean, now we go and sort of watch content, experience content, generally sitting down or at least just standing still. And, you know, in the future, it'll be much more interactive. I think the Nintendo Wii kind of technology was just an indication of where this is all going, in the sense that you played a game with some device that you held and it interacted with the screen. Going forward through the virtual reality technology, and again, just recently, Facebook paid $2 billion for one of these companies because they see that as being the future. Clearly, it's not Facebook's primary business, but they believe that this is a whole new world of interactivity whereby you will be able to move and run and interact with the show that you're in, the movie that you're in, and they're shooting it with cameras that are shooting off in every direction all at the same time. Of course, these cameras are used for live performances where, you would have the interaction with a concert or a sports event. You're sitting on the court, you're at the concert, you're looking around, and you could be experiencing that concert with people who are in different cities or different parts of the world. All of these things are content, and I think that where it all goes from here is from the technology point of view fascinating, but still what is most important is the emotional impact that it has on us to make us laugh, cry, reflect. But I think from an educational point of view, it's going to be much more realistic, much more exciting than just this kind of sit back and watch it happen and zone out on the screen. There have been a lot of studies to say that for young children's development, just to sit down and watch a screen, even if it's educational programming like Sesame Street and so on, has some negative effects on the development of their brains and so on. But if you're involved in the experience and you're actually integrated inside of it, then there's hyperstimulation, which helps to grow the brain faster in young people and, of course, in adults as well. So that's where I think it becomes very exciting to strengthen and accentuate us, as opposed to the opposite effect that I think a lot of people have been suffering over the last 50 years of audiovisual entertainment.
Yes.
Anyway, what I wanted to do also was, if you can introduce yourself as well. Unpredictable.
Unpredictable, cosmic introduction.
Yes.
Yeah, William Pfeiffer. I am the CEO of Dragon Gate Entertainment. We're a film and TV production company. We also finance films. We have a partnership with Lionsgate to produce local language movies around the world, including in India. And I have another company that has TV channels, primarily around Asia, local language television channels around the world. But I've been in the entertainment business for over 30 years. I've been living in Asia for 33 years, and film and television primarily.
Thank you very much. I know one thing, you're a very nice chef at home, and he prepares Indian-style chai and everything I enjoy. You got very nice, nice place to come and eat. Just can you introduce yourself and...
Sure. My name is Rupak Saluja. I am the founder and CEO of a company called the 120 Media Collective, which is a communications and content group in India. We're a company that creates, produces, distributes, monetizes, creates engagement around, and promotes the content that we're producing. Under the 120 Media Collective, we have a few different brands. So we have India's leading independent digital agency and India's largest television commercials production company. And we recently launched, and so that's called Jack in the Box, and the production company is Bang Bang. We recently launched something called Superfly, which is a joint venture with a company in London called Diagonal View, which is one of the world's leaders in channel management and audience development on YouTube and other digital video platforms. And by creating Superfly, we as a group hope to be able to now build content brands direct to audiences.
My name's Stina Madani, and I work for Viacom Media Networks for a division called MTV World, which is Viacom's global innovation division. We create content on 5 different verticals: activism, fashion, film, love and relationships, and music. And that content is distributed in a number of ways. It could go straight to channel, for example, to MTV, or it could also live on third-party distributors like Netflix or Hulu. I'm responsible primarily for social media, marketing, events, partnerships, sometimes tapping into distribution and ad sales as well.
Could you please turn your name cards around? We can't see your names. Thank you. With the larger ones.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
I don't think I have a larger one, but I'll tell you my name right now. My name is Mitra Kalita. I'm the managing editor of the Los Angeles Times. I was brought in about 5 months ago to hasten our efforts in our digital transformation from being just a newspaper to being much, much more. I spent the last 10 years mostly starting up companies for larger brands. I launched the New York section for Rupert Murdoch at the Wall Street Journal. And I launched something that hopefully some of you are familiar with, a business paper called Mint, which is based in New Delhi, which is today India's second largest business newspaper. And for the last 3 years before coming and moving out to Los Angeles, I launched Quartz, which is the global economy site of The Atlantic magazine.
So,
Should I keep going?
yeah, keep going, just tell me,
Karthik, can
in
you get
the
the
context,
people outside
and that's a question I'm going to
So-
give to all of you, because
quickly?
all of you have managed to and are monetizing content, correct? You wouldn't be here, your companies would not survive if you did not know how to do it. What's your biggest fear? Is it all going to explode into some kind of chaos? Is that a fear? Can you control it? Are you gatekeepers? Is there space for gatekeepers anymore?
So I'm glad you mentioned the word chaos, because I think a few years ago, someone like me would not be the managing editor of the Los Angeles Times. I'm a very chaotic person, and that's precisely why I think I understand the internet. Of course, anyone who pretends to understand the internet should be kicked out of the room, but has kind of a grasp on the chaos of the internet, because in many ways it mimics the trajectory perhaps of my career, of my family, of my crazy moves around the world, of my gravitation towards startups, but sort of clinging to legacy. And so I'm glad you mentioned chaos, because I think it's something that a lot of people recoil from as opposed to running towards. And some of the answers, of course, are in that chaos. The monetization of content is a part of also why I was brought in. And I just want to rewind a little bit to get to how we define content and really what I think some of the monetization, both opportunities and challenges are for us. I've actually banned the word content for the last few years because I think what was happening was that you saw maybe 5 years ago, the trend was that every company, from Sears to American Airlines to JCPenney to Lionsgate, became technology companies, right? It was sort of this ubiquitous, technology is everywhere, e-commerce is everywhere. And the last year, I've seen a redefinition where everybody is now a content creator, a content company, or a media company. And those of us who've been doing this, in my case for my entire career, but in the case of the Los Angeles Times for 131 years, who've really been content creators all along, really risk losing a lot right now. And so the reason that I don't use the word content is because we are not in the business of creating mindless content. We're in the business of journalism. And there's been a lot more existential questions that I'm assuming we're going to get into on this panel about platform versus publisher. And I do see myself certainly as both. I'm happy to talk about some of our efforts off platform to meet readers where they are. But I really do wake up every morning, and beyond the question of platform versus publisher, I go to work realizing we are a pillar of democracy. And so in the discussion of where do we fit into this chaotic content generating industries around us, I really do think the need to differentiate is what is going to save us. That people will always need information, that information can transform a society, that the desire to be informed and entertained is greater than ever, and that some of the models that we relied upon earlier are actually what is not tenable. And so it might sound very basic, but I do think that we need to approach every day, every campaign, every ask of us with the, is this editorially driven? Is this journalism? Is this commercially viable? Is this a monetizable audience that has that is at its core? And some ways that we are monetizing are probably the ways that a lot of folks are monetizing. There's, of course, traditional advertising. For those of, I don't know how many of you have been following all of the controversy around ad blockers, but you know, the unspoken thing about monetization right now is that it's actually forcing advertising to also get a lot better. That kind of the reliance on content as the delivery for ads that are going to block your what you actually want to get to sort of the getting in the way of an efficient user experience is not going to work, and lots of companies out there are happy to reduce that friction. And so for people like me, it's actually up to us to take the best practices of what are working online and work hand in hand with advertising to make sure that stories are getting out there. Now, there is a Chinese wall. It's a little bit more porous than it used to be, but that is really kind of where I'm coming at it from.
Yeah.
Sure, so from a distribution standpoint,
I think is mic on?
sorry?
Yeah, the mic's on. You just need to be a little closer to it.
Sure. So for our content for InTV, the bulk of our revenue and monetization comes either from where our content lives, either on a Netflix or Hulu platform, driving revenue through sale there, or through advertisers, as well as you were speaking. But I think maybe so that's kind of the bulk of what I have to say for distribution. It's constantly changing, and constantly changing within. With what content we're creating. So for example, if it's more provocative content, it might have a better place to live where like on a platform like a Netflix or a Hulu. I mean, distribution's not core my strength, so.
I don't know how many of you guys caught the Kevin Spacey video from a couple of years ago when he was at the Edinburgh Film Festival talking about the redefinition of content and content formats, right? So according to him, so his whole thing was, okay, what is a movie? What is a TV show? What would it be if you were consuming a piece of 46 minutes on your iPad? Is that a movie? Is that a TV show? What is it, right? So these traditional definitions of content are kind of going to go out of the window. I'm not saying cinema is going anywhere. That's not going to die, but there's going to be, that's going to be much more fluid in terms of what the definition of content is. And I think that is largely driven by distribution. I think it was Subhash Chandra, the MD, the chairman of the Z Group, who I first heard say about 10 years ago that content is king, distribution is God. And I couldn't really agree more. I think that's a very, very important point. And even before the digital era, it was true. Now it is even more so true than ever before. So we're living in the era of the 4-screen paradigm, right? Or the 5-screen paradigm even. And the fact is that content consumption, I think we're moving towards an era where you're going to have a piece of content that might be reformatted for device and consumption occasion. So you have the 90-minute version, the 24-minute version, the 12-minute version, and the 2-minute version. What that's going to say about the video editing industry, I don't know, but it does raise a lot of questions. So I think that distribution is a very, very important part of the puzzle, and I think perhaps the most important, I would argue. Coming to, I think, Shekhar, you were talking about monetization earlier, and I think that, at the end of the day, if you really analyze it, there's only two basic ways of monetization, right? You either get your viewers to pay for it, or you get brands to fund it in one way or another, whether it's through advertising or in more sophisticated ways, which I think Mitra was referring to as well, which is native advertising, etc. It's not, brands have been investing in content in a non-advertising manner for quite a while now. So if you look at the BMW films from 2001, they spent $10 million to fund pieces of content, which were stand-up pieces of content, in my opinion, extremely engaging. No brand has ever done something as grand since. And maybe they will, but there's all different ways in which brands are actually investing in content. So I'll give you another example, which is from India, which is a very sort of low-tech version of investing in content, but an extremely innovative idea. I was telling someone about this yesterday. So Unilever, or their Indian subsidiary, Hindustan Unilever, is by far the largest advertiser in India, right? And they're more dominant in India than P&G is in the US. Now, they wanted to reach, so there's the state of Bihar and the state of Jharkhand, which are among the most underdeveloped parts of India. There are parts of these two states which are completely media dark. And Unilever was trying to figure out how to actually reach these potential consumers and get them to buy their products. Now, if you have no media, how do you do it? So they said, you know what, we'll create our own media. There's a phenomenon in India called the missed call, okay, which is that if you aren't very affluent and you're paying 10 rupees and or 20 cents to buy your phone credit, you can only afford so much. So you're not going to waste it on making calls. So instead you just give people a missed call and you don't get charged for it. So there's this entire code, like I give you 3 missed calls, 4 missed calls, whatever. Right? So Unilever sent SMSs out to this potential target and said, send a missed, or give this number a missed call, and we'll call you back with content. So basically you call in the number, you hang up, 5 seconds later your phone rings, and you have 15 minutes of songs, movie segments, all on audio, and in between you have Unilever placing their advertising. So to me, this was pure genius, right? So there's different ways in which brands are investing in content, but they're definitely wising up to it, and they understand that they need to do it. So monetization of content comes from that side, and obviously the way that we probably know more about in this room, which is SVOD or paying for it directly in one form or another.
I'm going to try and get this conversation a little deeper, all right? So I might challenge you, please don't get upset with me, all right? I'm a creative person, I'm rebellious, so do it.
Can somebody close the door so that,
Yeah, this better be a closed door comment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's all privilege. We are all lawyers as well, listening to you and journalists.
How valid are you? That's a fundamental question. Why do you think the organization is valid as against 100 billion tweets or Facebooks or nations? Or what gives you the right to say that we are an organization that's valid? And if you cannot prove that you're valid, then why would you survive? I just want to understand in the future, but let me try and explain myself. I'm going to do a little talking. After all, what social media is doing is sucking inertia out of the system, right? Structures survive on inertia. You create a company and you think it's because I spent so many years in doing it. There's an inertia in the system that will make sure I will survive, and I'll keep on monetizing it. Monetization depends on your structuring abilities, but monetization also depends on inertia. So if you look out into the ocean today, and I take a camera and I shoot it at 14 frames per second, and I say, identify a wave, you won't. I shoot it at 10,000 frames a second, I'll say, identify a wave. You'll see the conflict between the trough and the, what's it called, the crest and the trough. And you understand that there's a constant conflict between the crest and trough. Now, the crest can survive if there's inertia in the system. Each year, we talked about this last year. We had a lot of conversations, what's this conference going to be about? And we realized it's about the same thing because inertia is being sucked out. So why do you think, any of you will survive as there's no inertia in the system? Because we understand that structures survive, any structure, nations, governments survive only because there's elections once in 5 years. If there's election every day, there'd be no government. But are we heading that way, and why would you survive? It's just a very fundamental idea.
Oh, I think it's a very fair question. And I think that, especially for legacy institutions, this question of relevance, of validity, and of mission is actually one that we probably need to address more than ever. And in all of the change is the one that is probably most ignored because we're so busy keeping up with technology. I do come back to, so for the last 10 years, because I was chasing, probably as some of you in this room might be, just chasing traffic, right? You're trying to build a new company, and the best way to do that is with eyeballs. I think the validity of an organization like the Los Angeles Times is actually our geography. And in a time of a borderless society, I think geography actually does matter. That we come to a point in our lives where who our neighbors are matters, the role of government in fixing our sidewalks matters, my child's school matters, and there are many, many elements of social media that are addressing that, right? If you look even within India at the RTI Act, it's catching up to kind of the watchdog is all of us versus the media. But what does that say? It also points to a failure of the media to truth squad a lot of what was going on. And so I see our role actually is, our role remains to watchdog. Is it gatekeeper-like? It is, although I think we're starting to open up the gate and to transform our mission to partner with communities, that it's actually okay for journalists to say we care about the communities that we cover. We are in this to improve society, and that is actually what's driving us. Once upon a time, that might be seen as not objective, and I think we're so beyond that. And also, I think we're in such a crisis in what you're describing, which is a bit of an echo chamber. You know, my kid gets on Instagram and she has no idea if she's seeing original content or if it's an ad for, you know, Lindsay Lohan's purse or something. I mean, to me, the ability of a consumer to distinguish is actually important. So amid the clutter, I see great relevance for organizations like ours, again, to Truth Squad.
Will you survive?
I hope so. I'm really counting on it. So one thing I'll say is that in this, I'm counting, I mean, I'm being very honest about it. I feel like those of us who can try to transform owe it right now. I mean, so speaking from India, my husband's an artist, and the other day I was sitting in a classical music concert with the critic, and I said, so who does this job when you're done? Who's investing in classical music criticism, if not the Los Angeles Times? And he said, I don't know who does this. And I said, I've lived in a society that suddenly has no art critics, India, and guess what determines the beauty of art? It's not criticism, it's actually commerce. And you know, that to me is a little bit fearful. I think there is a role for us to play. Now, again, do we open up the gate so that the voices of those critics are more plentiful and more in touch with our readers? Absolutely. That is my hope, that by doing that we might survive.
And then, I could jump in here. For validity on our end, I think the key components are really authenticity and your connection with the consumer multiplied by innovation, because you constantly need to you know, be breaking boundaries, that everything is constantly in change and in flux and disrupting the past. And I think probably the best way to explain this a little bit further is through one of the series we've been working on with Rebel Music, and it's a series about youth in art driving social change in their countries. And what we're doing is we're taking an innovative look at countries that we never hear about, who are, where youth are either you know nothing about the country or they're plagued in negative stereotypes. So for example, for one of the countries we focused on was Myanmar. And if you even think to yourself right now, what do you know about the youth in Myanmar? What are they doing? What do they care about? What are they passionate about? Or another community that we focused on was Native America, right here in our own backyard. And no media is covering the youth, and they've been plagued by stereotypes. And what we did is, you know, explored, gave the mic to the youth instead of constantly, you know, kind of coming up and, you know, forcing our angle or otherwise. We literally passed the mic and invited them to tell their story. And that's kind of really where everything changed. And we, you know, a lot of you might think, oh, who might care? Like, who really wants to know a little bit about, you know, what's happening in these communities? And so, you know, we pushed it out and we put it on, launched on MTV's Facebook page. We thought that was the best route from a distribution perspective, so that we could reach youth who don't have cable access, the majority of them. And it literally went viral, and it wound up becoming MTV's most viewed and shared video in its history, which was really exciting, and you know, led to validation from the White House that also asked us to do a screening and create additional content for them. And I think probably the best way to share with you what it's all about is to actually show a video, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
As indigenous peoples, we've been dehumanized so much, and this music is a powerful tool to express our humanity.
چهره واقعی کشورمون رو میتونیم با موزیکمون نشون بدیم.
We are the voices of the voiceless.
Gaz tüfeğiyle apış arama vurdular. neve da cima viesse d'abord come ça.
You are not free from violence anywhere, and that's what I want to change during this.
خوانندگی بعد از انقلاب برای خانم‌ها غیرقانونی شد.
They give us a fake democracy. It's not real.
Et corruption, et malversation, l'injustice.
Senegalese youth was ready for change, ready for revolution.
If there is one thing in this world that can make us unite, it's just music.
No one's going to come into the res and save us. We have to decide to be that change that we need. We have to do it ourselves.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
And so to be valid, I think you really need to understand your consumer, you need to understand your marketplace. I mean, we really focus and target on especially the counterculture youth. If you look at what's happening right now in the marketplace, it's provocative content that's really winning the game. If you take a look at what HBO's been doing, Game of Thrones, Netflix, all across the board, it's that content that's just really free to go out there and also really tap into the people out there and listen to what they want, especially with Generation Z hitting college campuses now. They're very concerned about what's happening in the world, about violence. I mean, every day they choose not to buy bottled water because they're concerned about how it's affecting the planet. And so it's just, in the end, know your market, know your consumer, and, take chances and risk and be innovative.
I'm surprised you still call it a market and consumer. The more, from what I see those are outdated words, aren't they? That's my market, that's my consumer, that's your community.
Correct, community, yes, but it's a back and forth. It's, part of it's reaching, trying to reach that right audience because everything is so targeted right now, but also, it's a dialogue and it's a conversation constantly. And also just from a transmedia perspective, how people are consuming content. People, no one's sitting back anymore. You're, just even the way we create content for this series, you're consuming on multiple screens. For example, we launched on Facebook because we wanted to really have that engagement. We had over 30,000 comments. We had record-breaking shares. So it's really that kind of engagement and dialogue. But, you need to also be able to, reach and find them too, because it's a cluttered marketplace, so that they know what's going on.
I think it's a great and provocative question. Traditionally, if you look at television and film, validation would come from critic reviews, it would come from TV ratings, box office revenue, DVD sales, and the like, as well as ultimately profits, as these are companies that are creating these, film and television forms of entertainment. But what I think is interesting, is the content that you're making, I hate to use that word, call it something else, the stuff you're making relevant and meaningful and impactful. You just looked at that video where you had those revolutions that were started in Egypt and the Middle East and all around the world through social media and through mobile phones and using the new technology in a way, empowering people. There are TV shows and movies that, empower women and minorities and downtrodden people in the LGBT community and all these kinds of people to come out, transgender, all of this stuff is coming out because people are making shows and movies about these issues. And I think it's incredibly transformative and empowering for those groups. However, having said that, the masses of people still are gravitating towards the pablum, towards the mindless, the simple, the quick and easy entertainment. And I guess that's okay to sort of bring them in as a gateway, but then, if you get them down that path and then find a way to uplift them and educate and to, further our species, if you will, to get back to, Deepak's cosmic positioning of where we are in the scheme of things, then I think it is very valid. If you look at good movies, going back Dead Poets Society, and some of these things where they were trying to educate and make a message. There's so many of these meaningful movies, but what's happening more and more now through the social media, which I'm a little bit concerned about, is it gave people a voice to go onto Twitter, to go onto Facebook, and you have all these people that like you. People are looking for validation as people by posting things and trying to see if people like them. I know that now Facebook is debating whether they should put a thumbs down or a unlike or dislike or really find annoying, or they're trying to find some word to indicate displeasure with what people are posting. And you're seeing it on Twitter, for example. There was this woman who got on a flight to go to Africa, and she, before I got on the flight, said, "Oh, I'm going to Africa. I hope I don't get AIDS. Oh, I won't get AIDS because I'm white." And she turned off her phone. 11 hours later, arrived in Africa, and the Twitter thing was going crazy. There were millions of people all over the world really thumbs downing and saying the worst things about this woman. She was trying to be a little bit humorous. It wasn't funny. It wasn't appropriate. It wasn't clever, but she wasn't really thinking about it, and it sort of destroyed her. She was fired from her job. All over the world, people were saying the worst kinds of things. She was literally destroyed, and she wasn't even aware of it. She was in an airplane, and it all happened while she was, comfortably eating peanuts. And so I think that, she and many others in this world, you hear about these kids that commit suicide because they post something and people say how stupid it is and so on. And we all probably have these kinds of experiences in a limited way, where the media, the power of this, I guess you can call it content or whatever it is that people are putting out there, can be very destructive. And in a way, it goes against democratization, where it was giving everybody a voice. Twitter, Facebook, all these things, Instagram, they're giving people a voice whereby they can go and say something, and they have people that listen, and those people have followers, and that spreads around the world in some kind of way that can have an impact. On the other hand, it can go the other way, where people are getting beaten up and bonked on the head, and therefore they stop interacting. They don't want to raise their voice. They want to stay quiet. They want to stay anonymous. They pull back. It's this sort of reverse wave. And we're starting to see that now. So I think, is that a valid use of Twitter? Is that valid for them to be creating a business whereby people are destroyed? And I question that, and I question a lot of the violent games and a lot of the violent, movies and television shows and the stuff that kind of twists people's minds. Although we all make money off of it, and it is certainly a business. It's debatable as to whether it's really valid, meaningful, and good for society.
William, you just said that a lot of people, the masses, are gravitating towards mindlessness. Is that a product more of our own marketing, or is it that's what people do? Because what I hear is a completely contradictory position from MTV, that people are gravitating towards shows that express them.
I think that's more and more. If you look at the shows that are hitting today, they are thoughtful, and the television content is getting better and better and more well written. And there is that certain quality that's coming out through television and film, and that is fantastic. And there is certainly that, and that is almost going to the people who are already of that ilk, if you will. I mean, the people who are going to listen to Deepak, the people who are going to listen to classical music, are people that like that kind of thing and like classical music. The people who are first getting introduced to music all around the world, I'm talking about underdeveloped countries and everywhere, they go out and they're exposed to MTV and the radio and all this other music, and the stuff they go to is the simple, catchy beat that is maybe hip hop or whatever, and it's simplistic, and it's the rave thing that everyone has, 120 beats per minute kind of thing. Pounding, we all know what this stuff sounds like. There's huge numbers of people that are going to these kinds of shows, and maybe there's validity in that, and it's entertaining, and it's good for that moment. But, you know, if that's all people listen to, and if people are just mindlessly watching television and silly shows and all of these, you know, reality shows and the Kardashians this and the Lindsay Lohan that, and, you know, where does that go? And I believe that without having data to throw out at the moment, that the vast majority of the people are sort of in that direction, as opposed to, you know, the thought-provoking, really good quality television shows, the great music, the great, you know, thoughts, the great books, the things that are written. Who reads physics? You know, people read People magazine and Instagram and tweets, and they're all doing that all day, as opposed to reading real books that are uplifting, that are the classics that really could, you know, improve people's minds. That's a view.
My daughter, when she was 13, lives in India and goes to school in India, and she said, "Daddy, why are the Kardashians famous?" And I said, "Because you're asking. That's why." It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It just goes on. Yeah.
I think there's two conflicting trends, right? There is, on one hand, there is the more meaningful kind of content. At the same time, yes, it's true that there is more what we label as mindless content. But who's to say what's mindless? You know, if people are enjoying it, there's nothing, you know, it's relative, because within the mindless as well, there's stuff that's really mindless. There's other stuff that's kind of been disguised as being more palatable and more popular. So if you look at the rise of BuzzFeed, right? In the past 90 days, 5 of the top 20 videos in the world that have been consumed are BuzzFeed videos. Okay, that's 25% of the entire amount. That's huge, right? So that is telling us something about the kind of content that we're consuming. And I think at the end of the day, while there is way more content with the rise of consumers becoming content creators and, you know, what have you, and social, the fact is that because of virality, you have more content, there's a plethora of content, but then to get noticed and seen, I think never has it been more important for content to be compelling, because before you had everything that was orchestrated by marketing dollars, right? Now, there's some of that works, but virality is a very powerful thing. So I think that meaningful content or quality content is way more important today, and even though there's probably, you know, I mean, there's 300 hours of content uploaded onto YouTube every minute. So there's stuff like that happening, but never before has it been more important to have quality content. I think you're going to see, that's why you see the trends like, you know, Game of Thrones and the golden age of American and even British television that's occurring right now. It's because people are pushed, because your audience is demanding more and expecting more reality, more thinking, more mind thought-provoking stuff. So that's, I think, where we're heading.
I would agree. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, the only thought I had was I would agree. The only difference is, do we perhaps know now when we're losing audience? That a lot of folks I deal with every day kind of talk about this golden age of journalism where stories about Burma would seemingly be consumed. And it was like, well, actually, we really don't know. And so now that we know, the question is, what do we do about it? And I think that gets at what you're talking about as far as really meeting our audiences and making our content as compelling as possible.
Yeah. And I would echo on that, creating compelling content. I mean, I think that, you know, how often do you really see activism-focused content that is really, you know, pushing boundaries and is provocative? One of my especially pet peeves is people kind of put a lot of do-good content in this pro-social category, where, you know, just the way it's packaged and created is just incredibly boring and just not, it doesn't engage people. So if you're going to, you know, create content like that, it's simply not going to, you know, do as well. So where you see, and I think that that's what really resonated with this audience, is that, you know, we have, and also engage them back and forth, is that it's very provocative. It makes people think, it's authentic, it's real, it's giving people a new perspective into lives. And I think there's also something that's happening, which is a generational shift. So if you look at millennials, it's all about me, and, you know, the selfies, et cetera. But there is a new generation that's emerging that's on college campuses starting now, and it's Generation Z. And even when you look at the stats, I mean, 25% of the community volunteers. I mean, what generation can you really say about that? They're concerned about violence. They're concerned. They're making actual choices and changes in their life to make a difference, which is pretty incredible. So I think we also have to think about that, because each generation reacts to the next, and so it's important to consider as well.
So I think let's move on to some other comments from all of you here, because once again, you got some, this booklet in front of you. There are some questions. If you want to speak, you want to comment, you want to have a question, that would, so our whole idea is that, some of the questions here are, is censorship possible anymore? And maybe, Howard, you might want to say a word and introduce yourself, and others as well. Please come forward and talk. So, any thoughts? Is censorship possible? How is it happening in China, if somebody has some idea, Okay. Yeah.
I'm Howard Frumis. I'm an attorney in Los Angeles, but I do a lot of work in China, throughout Asia. So this goes, there's a cross between Shekhar's question about validity and the issue of censorship. Do you lose validity in what you're doing if you do it within a context in which the government or regulatory authorities limit your creativity or your subject matter? And it's interesting because we're watching China deal with this. William knows a lot about this too. Almost weekly, the kinds of product that and creativity which was effective and allowed 12, 15 years ago has totally changed, even though in some senses the censorship in China is greater. I don't know how that happened. It's a constant push-pull between the political issues and, in a political sense, keeping the Chinese population happy enough that they accept their government, that they give validity to their leaders. And so what you find is more and more subject matters become possible, but from week to week, you don't know which ones will then disappear. So it's a constant push-pull. And I've given a lot of thought to this as we go forward, because just the simple question of, can I raise money for this movie? Well, there's no money except in China. Okay, will they put money into this movie in China? Well, they will if they can release it in China. Well, can they release it in China? Well, today they can, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So how do you evaluate that? So this whole process becomes one of, it's very a creative process, even though it's in the context of a situation in which Americans and most of the West would say, it's full of censorship, it's wrong. How can the government tell you what you should say and what you should see? But it's not that simple. Yeah. And one of the things you see is that because of the way in which the system works in other countries, let's look at the United States, I find more and more that if you want to look at it that way, there's censorship here too. There are people who don't want to make things or create things because they think they won't make money, or that the people in charge will not distribute them, or the actors will not participate in them. Yeah. So it's a very complicated issue, but it's one that just by looking at what seems simple, which is the censorship in China, it's a constant process of trying to figure out what is valid, what is authentic, what is real.
Sorry, I'm here. I just wanted to cut you in because there's an interesting question I want to ask. How many of you have ever imagined a society free of censorship? Just raise your hands. How many of you can imagine a society free of censorship? All right, would you describe that society to me? A society free of censorship. Have you seen it? Can you describe it?
Yeah. Sorry for that.
You see that microphone is censored.
It's a voice of voiceless.
Yeah. But you asked if I could imagine it,
yes.
Not if I think it would ever exist. because I think even if governments and regulatory boards do not censor people, I think people censor each other.
Yeah.
And the example of the woman who tweeted that awful thing is a perfect example, because it was wildly inappropriate, and she was told by lots of people that it was wildly inappropriate, and she will now censor herself.
So there is no censor-free society at all. Has there ever been? Would there ever be? That's a fundamental question we need to ask ourselves before we condemn censorship, because then it becomes a question of degrees, right?
I mean, you know, in my view, there needs to be some kind of censorship, because so many people, and myself included, cannot handle the reality of the world that you're presented with. I don't want to see, nor do I want my children to see, a snuff film. You know, I saw one of the worst things in my life that I haven't shared this with anybody was, and I got it on, you know, Facebook, where somebody posted this thing, and it was a little Chinese child about 3 or 4 years old sweeping a sidewalk very cheerfully, and some deranged, crazy guy came and kicked this child and then crushed this child underfoot. And it was the worst thing that I've ever seen. I can't get it out of my mind. It's been in my head for the 2 months or so that I've seen it. I don't want anyone else to see this. And I haven't told people about it so they don't go looking for it, because people do stop and gawk at the car accident as they're going by. They're looking for stuff that they think is exciting, or so they don't even know what they're looking for. You know, again, I've, you know, been responsible for bringing thrillers and horror films and all these terrible things to the world, and mixed martial arts fights and all, in addition to doing some wonderful things that I'm really proud of. But what I was getting to before was not so much me or the business or any of that, was, you know, the societal thing. I was taking it to the Deepak level to say, you know, is it better to have such openness where, you know, the people who are putting that stuff out there and the people who are looking at are defenseless, and it could sort of dement and torment and cause great damage to people, particularly those who are a little bit more vulnerable intellectually or emotionally or any other way, you know, around the world. And therefore, I think their censorship is required. You know, I think that traditionally television, you had people in the programming departments who were curating, aggregating, you know, choosing as arbiters of taste and what was good stuff. And I think maybe they went too far, and it's too much controlled by Fox, and, you know, they have their political agendas. But, you know, when it's all open to everybody, you could be exposed to really a mess of things that go viral and hurt society.
Hello? Yep.
Yeah, just speak into it.
Okay. My name is Karen Robson, and I'm an attorney here in LA, and I work in film and TV, particularly financing and distribution. But originally, when I became a lawyer in Australia, I was a media lawyer defending media companies primarily from defamation and libel and copyright infringement and things of that nature. And when I moved to the States and I became a lawyer here and I moved to New York, the first thing I attended a defamation trial in New York, the Westmoreland trial. And one of the things I was so excited about coming to this country was that this was the land of free speech. This was the land where you could say what you want, and you know, in Australia and in the UK, defamation was a very strong right that people had to stop the truth getting out about things. And this country is based on a constitution that has venerated free speech, but has tried to balance it. And all these cases that come before the Supreme Court, whatever you think of them, they have the difficult task of trying to balance, you know, when is it too much? When is the right to demonstrate outside a funeral of somebody who was killed in Iraq by a group that is anti-gay? You know, when should that be stopped? Should they be 50 feet from the funeral? Should they be 100 feet? So it is a very difficult task, but the reason I wanted to mention it is, you know, one of the greatest forms of censorship is the, you know, official secrets and government censorship of what we are entitled to know and what we are not entitled to know. And I think, you know, social media and the technology has been very disruptive of this in good and some would say bad ways. I mean, WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden, I don't know if anyone's mentioned those before, but, you know, this has allowed, so going back to the question of censorship, I guess, yes, you can say that there shouldn't be censorship, but the fact is whether there is or there isn't, there are repercussions for people who would bring out certain information or content into the world. And that, can be very serious repercussions depending where they live. And I don't know, I'm, proud to have come to this country because it has wrestled with this. I don't think it's necessarily succeeded. But I wondered if anyone would like to comment on, government secrecy and the concept of censorship.
Yeah, I am going to ask what storytelling is, but let's keep going.
I can talk a bit about censorship if you wanted.
Yeah, sure.
I think it was you made some excellent points, and I guess my main comment back would be it's all about smart, making smart decisions and making taking smart chances, because obviously that was. A lot of the artists that we worked with in all of the countries we worked with are risking their lives every day. They're really brave, fearless youth who want to drive change. And so it was obviously a consideration all the time on our end too, from a safety perspective, because they're putting themselves out on the line in a big way. And so you have to balance, the fight against oppression for change in turbulent countries, and also the love that people have for these countries. It's not all negative. It's that they want to, change the countries that they love and also embrace the good things that are happening. And so it's really, you kind of really need to find that balance. So for example, with Iran, a lot of it's primarily shot outside of Iran just simply because it's, it was tough. You can't really go in. There's a lot of censorship. There's a lot of issues to do so. But we recreated a lot of the storyline and told the stories of youth who are living around the world outside of Iran. And so there's stories that need to be told, but just, really kind of finding that right balance as the world becomes more open.
Ravi, you had something to say? I think he's a guy who created all these problems for censorship because he invented email, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
1978.
So we have a very interesting person sitting in the middle of us. So all the censorship and other issues slipped away when email started, and you do not know how to control emails.
So I have an observation I'd like to get your comments on. It's sort of this deeper issue of, you have this pyramid where you have information, then you have knowledge, and you have truth potentially that emerges from that, where you connect pieces of knowledge together. So today you have this big media companies who determine that, presentation of truth to us. And it's highly, I think, as we all know, suspect and could easily be collusionary because we don't know what the intentions of most of these media companies are, what their funding comes from, be it anyone who's on the stage today, so don't take it personally. Now suppose you have an environment where individuals can connect up pieces of knowledge together and they can evoke truth that comes out of that, essentially what we call in systems theory emergent properties. So the bigger question is the connections that people do and the truth that evokes from that. Then the bigger question becomes the integrity of those connections that they're putting together. So it's like the blind man, who looks at an elephant. Each person has their own view of what that thing is. But if we had open architectures where people could connect pieces of information together and present news on their own without any of these gatekeepers, what does that do to what news is and who presents that news? And I think it comes to the interesting issue of what is the integrity of that information. And getting back, I think, Shekhar, what you were saying, when you go to billions of people presenting these components of knowledge, one could argue that the emergent property that comes out of that could probably be much closer to truth than any of the gatekeepers that, put news together today. And it completely demolishes, and I think in a good way destroys the current media models. I just want the commentary on what happens when you allow people, and I think some of those tools are going to emerge.
I think we're actually already seeing some of them, and certainly folks in the so-called MSM like me rely on them in our news gathering process. So I do see one of my first hires when I got to the Los Angeles Times was somebody to cover Black Twitter. Now in the year that we've had, I felt like there were fair questions of if Michael Brown's body had not been tweeted over and over and over again, would that have become a national story, right? If we didn't have some of the watchdog social media going on over the last year and the videos and so forth. So it felt like an important newsworthy, when I say gesture, I don't mean this as an olive branch. I mean literally for us to say, we actually need somebody to mine these communities because it is a type of news gathering that we are unable to do, both from a resource perspective as well as just the model that mainstream media has been set up with. I see this also happening on campaign finance. You've seen this happening with Hillary Clinton's emails. I think some of what you're describing is perhaps a more technical architecture, but I think crowdsourcing the news is actually something that is very real. Again, I spoke about doing startups for the last 10 years. The one thing that everybody who starts with an audience of 0 knows is that building that audience is not something to be taken lightly, that just because you put information out does not mean that people will show up. And what keeps me at the LA Times to some extent is that I want to marry those untold stories with people still showing up every day to be informed, educated, and entertained. Now, again, that is perhaps a very legacy media approach on this panel, but I think that for those of us who are in institutions, we need to meet those groups halfway. That would be my response to that. I don't know if anybody else is working with similar efforts.
I just wanted to put one little point in that, is truth is an attitude. You know, there is no truth. There is like when I've seen something, I take away from it a bit of memory, and that memory is completely colored by my attitude. So there is no fundamental idea in news gathering that is absolute truth.
I think that's right. And the honest broker is a myth as well. So I even that, again, might have been controversial a few years ago for someone like me to say, but I think we've kind of come to accept that.
Yeah.
I think that the power of free speech, that point that was made earlier, is a very important one, that that has to be in some way the arbiter of what's real. I just saw recently a movie called Truth, which was about Dan Rather's news team reporting a story that was not true. They were duped by their sources, and this was on national broadcast television, and it was influencing people's views on the presidential candidate. And they were trying to do the right thing. I think in the point about who is the arbiter? It can't be the government because they're suspect. It can't be a small group of people. Everyone's got their agenda. It is the mass of people that hopefully jump on and react to things that appear to be untrue, and the people that dig into it. Those that wield the power of the platform, that is, the news gathering channels, the TV channels largely, and the newspapers and so on, have incredible power, and there should be checks and balances, but it should come from the people in an openness and a freedom for people to voice what they think is wrong. But the fact is that along the way in finding the truth, there would be a lot of collateral damage. A lot of people would be hurt. A lot of people would be called out for things that are not true. And hopefully things are molded into the truth, or as close as you can get over time. But it's a moving target that never ends, and there definitely are risks along the way to anybody who's out there in a position of visibility.
Actually, isn't it true that when we talk of information, I think information has already been democratized. So nobody can control information. Right. I think more important thing, a role of the newspapers and journals and other media would be to interpret that information. So at the bottom of information age, there's a data, and then data you organize, it becomes information. When you interpret information, it becomes knowledge, and when you add experience to knowledge is wisdom. So I think we are already in the information age where anything will be available, whether you like it or not. Now, next thing is, how do you interpret that? What do you make out of that information? I think that will be the next role I see of newspapers like
Just
that.
one point I was going to make, though, was that some people have a bigger platform and a larger voice. In democratization of opinion, I agree that everyone can say what they want on their tweet or on their Facebook, wherever, but most of those voices are unheard, and those who are in the media and that control that large broadcast have an unusually influential position that could be abused.
Yes.
Yeah.
Surprised this hasn't come up as yet, but a couple of us last night were talking about Digital India and the initiative and the tricolor profile pic that everyone, including myself, put up.
Your name quickly.
Oh, Meda. So the question is, first of all, I haven't read up clearly on this, but does putting a tricolored profile picture mean, A, that you're supporting internet.org, B, is this going to be a restricted internet that Google and all these guys are bringing into India, and for the setups that they're planning to do, and C, is this an issue? I mean, everyone has been talking about it online in the last 24 hours. What is your respective take on this topic?
So I just read something this morning that...
Yeah. Sorry? Explain to everybody.
So I think this is all about the fact that Modi was with Mark Zuckerberg a few days ago, and then there was this thing that went viral about putting up the Indian tricolor as your profile pic, which I think Meda's question is about. Does that actually indicate that is that a symbol for supporting internet.org, which is highly controversial for many reasons, right? So I read something this morning, which I suspect, I just saw it like scrolling through, but I think it was an official Facebook post that said that it is not. So if you've put it up, don't worry, you don't have to take it down.
And the second question was, is the internet that is going to be available in India a restricted internet, or is it going to be, are you only able to see certain sites, or I don't know.
I think that's the basic premise of internet.org, so it's definitely not net neutral.
So it's all a myth, basically.
Yeah. That's my take on it so far.
But in the context of, sorry, this is Gauri here from Nishith Desai Associates, but I think the idea of internet.org is one, but insofar as internet access is concerned, it's a free access in India, except the ISPs are required to block certain sites which violate the law, and there has been a lot of discussion recently, for example, blocking of pornographic sites. In fact, there was a matter before the Supreme Court of India, and the judges in fact made a statement that how can you control individuals watching certain content in the four walls of their houses or otherwise. So even the judges of the Supreme Court have been very sort of forward looking and accepting the freedom of speech. In fact, one of the sections of the Information Technology Act was struck down because under that particular act, certain individuals who posted certain things on the Facebook were arrested, and that provision was so wide to include anything causing annoyance or otherwise. So the Supreme Court of India actually struck down that provision and held it against freedom of speech and expression. So you will see that like in the US, we uphold freedom of speech and expression to a large extent, and therefore any curb which goes beyond the reasonableness is actually struck down by the courts of India.
I think one of the things I expect to see in future is more and more organizations, individuals will become responsible. Of course, it's first of all responsibility. What is responsibility itself one can question, but I think more and more organizations will create more value out of being responsible. It's a self-regulation that's going to, as society evolves, civilization evolves, I think those are the things come up. I was at Aspen conference, Brain Tech conference, the CEO of technology companies, and even this CVS pharmacy chairperson, she mentioned that they have closed down cigarette business, for example, $2 billion, okay, 1.5 billion regular cigarettes and electronic cigarettes as well, because they think it's more responsible for us. Now, one can always question, but I think as we move forward, there'll be more responsibility. And as people realize and people become more responsible, these things will change. So, what to put on the internet, what not to put, how to go about it, it will be more and more left to the people themselves. But I think till that time, how things would be managed, regulated is something that, we all will have our own opinions on that. I would not comment.
I think this idea of the wisdom of the crowd is it's a hot discussion.
Yeah.
Ultimately, democracy assumes the wisdom of the crowd, doesn't it? Except that it only happens once in 5 years, but you assume that there is a wisdom of the crowd and they've got in the government, they've rightly thought about it. And forever there's been an argument that only the educated should vote and the uneducated should not vote. So where do we stand in sense of democracy? And we come back to this idea that in the perfect utopian internet, free speech world, everybody expresses their opinions, and the opinions that have a greater impact will rise to the top and become the opinions of the world, and people will fight back. I mean, I believe that, and I wish for that. But for that, almost every gatekeeper has to disappear, you know?
Oh, I don't know about that.
I'm just being provocative again.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, because I was chasing anonymous clicks for the last few years, and now I'm immersed once again in readers, Los Angeles voter turnout for school board elections was 9%. I think it was the record low. And for city council elections in March was 11%. Pretty, I don't know if it was a record low, but pretty low. And so I look at those numbers against this backdrop of if we are becoming so democratized, if the future of, I'm saying this as far as the American city, but I think you can make an analogy in India of an influx of college-educated youth who are trying to redefine a society and pursue their dreams. What is the disconnect of an institution like mine if our voter turnout, the easiest perhaps democratic exercise, free speech is a fair response to that, but really, what is our democracy if not that turnout? And so, I do take that as a personal kind of challenge to figure out how do we bridge what we're seeing online with those numbers that I just rattled off, knowing that in my case, geography is something I can work with.
Okay, I think, yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Shekhar, to your point earlier about, a quasi-utopian situation where you have debate and discussion and, between differing points of view and may the best idea rise to the top after discussion. The problem is that a lot of this stuff is happening on social media platforms, right? And there is an issue with Facebook, which actually, a lot of people have commented on this, that it actually self-propagates stuff because you like certain content, you have a bunch of friends who are somewhat like-minded, not everyone. And so what happens is you're all drinking your own Kool-Aid because you're only listening to your own points. And the algorithm actually further promotes stuff that is more like yours. So there's a big danger with platforms like Facebook that you're only going to be consuming one kind of content and looking at one point of view. So differing points of view go out the window.
I have just a small question. We'll close very soon for lunch. But Dina and Nusrat, I think, you came up with this video. What made you do that?
Yeah.
MTV video.
What made us come up with the video?
Yeah.
Well, honestly, Nusrat is the brainchild behind it, and I don't know if you want to.
He's here, isn't he?
He's here, Nusrat.
Oh.
Hey.
Make yourself heard, Nusrat.
Nusrat Durrani from Viacom. Nishith, your question was what made us come up with this concept?
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. In my travels, I first of all manage a division within Viacom. It's called MTV World, which was created several years ago with the explicit notion of actually creating content that was more global-minded and equalizing. And in our research, we found that there are entire countries that have been, just described in shorthand, particularly in Western media. And when in our travels we discovered that the realities on the ground, particularly around youth, are so dramatically different from what we see in Western media that we were compelled to somehow humbly correct that. There are many examples of what I'm talking about. In the first season of Rebel Music, we featured Egypt, and the narrative around Egypt in the US at the time was a bunch of weird people like slaughtering themselves, bearded men talking, all you saw were older people, politicians, talking. And the revolution there was actually driven by the youth on both sides. And their stories were nowhere to be seen on the content, at least that I was consuming. And we went there and we corrected that notion by actually telling the stories of people who were driving that change, whichever side they were on. Similarly with Afghanistan, the narrative is Afghanistan is Taliban, it's Karzai at the time, it's our troops getting slaughtered, it's misogyny, it's craziness. But again, that country has 70% of the people in that country are actually young people, very much like young Americans who are just interested in living their lives and are doing incredible things, trying to be musicians, trying to learn how to ride a bicycle, trying to just to go to school. And their stories were lost in this larger sort of more powerful narrative in the West. And again, we went to Afghanistan and told the story of a young documentarian, a girl who was also trying to learn how to ride a bicycle, because in Afghanistan, girls are not allowed to ride bicycles. And a young lady who was trying to be a hip-hop star. And those narratives are the things that we don't see enough of, and in the process, we've sort of created a very sort of dehumanized, stereotypical view of the world we live in. And the explicit purpose of Rebel Music is actually to try and correct that, to add more storytelling into the mix about real people doing incredibly beautiful things worldwide.
Okay, that's good.
Very good. It's all about responsibility, right? And before we go for lunch, Karthik, you want to say something?
Yeah, it's a question actually, and this is a personal.
Karthik is my colleague.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a personal worry. Will long form reporting survive for the next 10 years? I mean, you've already seen the New Yorker go only online, and especially with reducing attention spans, Snapchat, Twitter. Do you see long form reporting in its original sense, survive? For example, in India, there's the Caravan, there's New York. I mean, do you see this survive for in the next 10 years? Will we see any of this?
Very much so. So I actually am seeing, what will have to change is that the way we're writing long form needs to keep audience in mind, and that means that just because you write it, they won't come. There needs to be a distribution strategy. There needs to be a thought to how are we bringing people into this content. But I actually think it's a wonderful time now for both long form and documentary journalism. I'm seeing some brilliant work. In fact, India's entry court, which was just announced, is my understanding, is quite good. Is that a documentary?
No, it's
not. Somebody see how out of it I am now that I'm not there anymore. The other thought was that, I don't know who was it on this panel who mentioned versions of content. Was you? I think that's partly what's going to save us, that if we have a behemoth that we need to promote, right? And really, if you look at the arc of content creation, we focus so much over here, we distribute, and then we leave it to everybody else. We don't actually focus on what's happening on this end. And I'm actually heartened that that is changing. So we're seeing splicing of some of those pieces, we're seeing videos, we're seeing Snapchats, we're seeing Instagram as a way to get big thoughts very, very accessible.
And just a quick stat on that. From Freewheel, they put out their quarterly report on what's happening for long form and short form and digital online, and there's been an increased demand by like 25% for long form. So we were happy to see that, and we've also seen that with our test with Rebel Music as well. People stayed on 4 times longer than usual from MTV to watch the content. So I think if it's compelling, people will watch.
Yeah, people sleeping less. Yeah.
Yeah, I think before we go for lunch, I just want to introduce Vanna Tilak. Where is she? Vanna. Great. Can you just come? You heard her husband, Ravi. And who is Ravi? Is here or stepped out? Okay, no problem. Both have been very charitable and very, very active in the philanthropy side. So she heads Akshay Patra. She would like to say something about Akshay Patra. Actually, Akshay Patra provides content for the stomach, right? Which we are going to have very soon in the lunchtime. But maybe why don't you tell a little story or whatever. It's very interesting story. Again, storytelling comes up there too. So, Vanna, please.
Sure. Thank you, Nishith, for giving me just 5 minutes. And I'm just going to really take only 5 minutes. But just as we are getting really hungry for lunch, this story is about food, and I think this is the most appropriate time to speak. The organization I represent is called Akshay Patra. It feeds 1.4 million children every day in India. That's 370 million meals every year. And we run out of 22 kitchens in 10 states in India. This is about a story that starts in 2002 with 1,200 children to 1.4 million children today, and we are reaching for 2 million probably by the end of this year and 5 million by 2020. I'd like to show a short 45-second video, and after that I'll resume the story. Hila?
Thank you.
I want to become a nurse, engineer, doctor. I want to become police.
The news has spread in the village that there is a meal being provided in the school, and so more children have started showing up in the school.
ಊಟ ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ನಂಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಇಷ್ಟ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ತರಕಾರಿ ಕಾಳುಗಳೆಲ್ಲ.
Feeding a hungry child and seeing that the child gets educated is not charity. It's the social responsibility of everyone who is doing well in this world.
So time to feed yourself now.
Yes.
Thank you, Vanna.
Just
It was.
a couple more, one more.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So how it works is we run our own kitchens. We cook the food. We source the food from local farmers and suppliers. And we cook this about 100,000 meals at a time every day. The largest one, 400,000 meal kitchen, is going to be soon in working efficiency in another year. And we transport it up to 60 kilometers to 10,770 schools. This task is huge. This organization runs like a company, a well-built, profit-making company, except the profits are shared with all our customers, which are children. So we are very particular about the food we give them, that it does not come back, it does not get rejected. So one thing that we would like to share is to have you guys go, and when you go to India, and I know everybody has business in India, is to go and visit a kitchen in any of the cities that we operate in. Prime Minister Modi and President Clinton and Dr. Deepak Chopra, Shekhar here, and Nishith are all advocates of this amazing organization. So for this room, I would like to say just a call to action is to give 1 hour of your time once a month. And I'm here during lunch. I would love to speak. And so if your stomach is growling, just imagine what a child would do if that's the only meal you're going to get until tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Love to talk. Thank you.
Thank you. So we adjourn for lunch. Please make sure to be back here. If you're responsible, I'm sure you'll do that at 1:55, and so we can start at sharp 2 o'clock. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.